So, we finally got that all clear for the Driscoll family, but honestly, does anyone else feel like that was the quietest moment before a massive storm hits the cobbles? They've been on our screens for exactly 1 year now, and in that time, Ben Driscoll has gone from being this doting family man to someone who looks like he's carrying the weight of the entire street on his shoulders. It was supposed to be a celebration, right? Eva and Ollie were setting up this big family dinner to toast to the fact that Ben, Ollie, and Will don't have the same genetic condition that Jim McDonald has. They've spent months terrified that they'd inherited myotonic dystrophy, which is a pretty heavy storyline to put on a new family, especially when you think about how Jim's diagnosis back in 2016 really changed his life. But the funny thing is, while they're all sitting there saying they're relieved, you can just see it in Ben's eyes. This isn't the end of his problems. It's actually the moment his last excuse for his behavior just vanished. If he isn't sick, then he has to face the reality of who he actually is, and that is a much scarier thought for a man like Ben. Think about it for a second. When Ben first showed up with Eva and his mom Maggie, they were described as arriving with a suitcase full of secrets. At the time, we all thought that was just soap opera hype, but man, they weren't kidding. Ben was this former rugby pro, a guy who lived for his kids, and shared a massive passion for the game with the man he thought was his father, Alan Driscoll. He built his whole identity on being a doting husband and a solid guy. But then the writers pulled the rug out from under him, finding out that Jim McDonald, the ultimate Weatherfield loose cannon, is your actual biological father? That is a psychological nightmare. I mean, Steve McDonald is his half-brother. Can you imagine finding out you're related to that family after 40 years of thinking you were someone else? It's wild because Ben and Steve actually get along really well, but there's this shadow over them now. When Ben sat in the bistro recently, just staring into space, you could feel his pain through the screen. He was looking at an old photo of himself as a kid with Alan, the man who raised him, and you have to wonder what was going through his head. Was he mourning Alan, or was he mourning the version of himself that didn't have McDonald blood in his veins? Eva tried to comfort him, telling him that Alan loved him as his own, which was sweet. But then Maggie walks in and just ruins it. That's the thing about Maggie Driscoll. She is hands down one of the most manipulative characters we've seen in years. She didn't just have an affair. She built a 40-year lie and then acted like she was the victim when it all came out. The funny thing about the all-clear result is that it happened right as Megan Walsh was released from prison. If I were Ben, I wouldn't be worrying about my muscles weakening. I'd be worrying about the predator who just walked back into my son's life. This whole grooming storyline with Will has been so dark and honestly, so well handled because it shows how a master manipulator like Megan can just spin a web of lies to keep everyone in the dark. Even Sam Blakeman figured out something was wrong, and Megan just bullied him into staying quiet. That is a special kind of evil. And now, as we head into the trial, things are getting even more twisted. Did you see that Megan's mom, Janine, has turned up? She's crying and apologizing, and for a second, you almost want to believe she's a good person. But this is Coronation Street. Megan doesn't do remorse, so why would her mother? My theory is that Janine is just another weapon in Megan's arsenal. She's basically been recruited to spy on the Driscolls. It's one of the coldest things I've ever seen a character do, turning your own mother into a spy against a teenage victim like Will. And then you've got the actual trial where Megan is telling the court that Will only said those things because his dad, Ben, pressured him. It's classic gaslighting. She's trying to make the jury think Ben is the villain because of his temper. And let's be honest, Ben hasn't exactly helped himself there. He's already threatened to put Carl Webster in the hospital for messing with his family. He punched Adam Barlow when he found out Eva had confided in him about her abortion. So when Megan stands up in court and points at Ben's dark side, the jury might actually believe her. It makes me so angry because Ben isn't a bad guy. He's just a guy who's been pushed to the absolute limit by a mother who lied to him and a predator who hurt his son. When he lost it on the stand during the trial, half the viewers probably thought he was destroying Will's case, but I actually think it was just a dad breaking under the weight of all that guilt. What really gave me chills, though, was Will asking to go back into the courtroom to face Megan face to face. That is incredible bravery for a kid who has been through what he has. It reminds me a bit of the stuff Tim Metcalf went through years ago with his abuser, and it's great that the show is actually referencing that history. It makes the world feel so much more real when these characters can connect over shared trauma. But the big question is, will the jury see through Meghan's game? She is such a master manipulator, and with her mom playing the remorseful part on the outside, justice feels like it's hanging by a thread. Back at the Rovers, things aren't much better. Ben basically used that celebration dinner to expose Maggie in front of everyone. He told the whole family that she had a part in his father Alan's death. Now, if you missed that flashback episode for the 65th anniversary, it was intense. We saw Maggie and Alan arguing about Ben's rugby, and Maggie ended up pushing Alan down the stairs. He died, and she just let everyone believe it was an accident. She even turned it around, so Ben thought Alan was the one being aggressive. It's sick, really. She's been living with that for 30 years. No wonder Ben told her he wanted nothing to do with her. But Maggie being Maggie, she didn't just walk away quietly. She insulted him and poured salt into the wound. Even when she's been caught in the ultimate lie, she still finds a way to be the aggressor. Eva is trying to be the peacemaker, telling Ben he should be kind to his mom. But how do you forgive someone who murdered your father and then lied about your biological dad for your entire life? I honestly don't think Ben can do it. And I don't think he should. The thing is, the Driscoll family is changing. This whole situation with Meghan has completely shifted how they trust each other. Ben is trying to be the man of the house, but he's falling apart. Will is actually the one showing the most strength right now. And Ollie? He's just caught in the middle of all this McDonald/Driscoll chaos. It's a lot for any family to handle, let alone one that's only been in town for a year. The funny thing is, Aaron McCusker, who plays Ben, actually auditioned for 6 other roles over 13 years before he finally got this part. He even tried out for Todd Grimshaw. But he said he's glad he waited for a bigger role, like the pub landlord. You can tell he's putting everything into this performance. He really makes you feel Ben's frustration. And Pauline McLynn as Maggie? She is terrifyingly good at being awful. They worked together on Shameless years ago, so they already had that chemistry, which really shows in how much they seem to genuinely irritate each other on screen. So, where does this leave us? The Driscolls are healthy, physically at least. But emotionally? They're a wreck. Megan Walsh is out there spinning her lies, and the trial is going to be a total explosion. I'm genuinely worried that Ben is going to do something he can't take back. If Megan walks free because of her mom's performance, I can see Ben taking the law into his own hands. And if he does that, he's just proving his mom right, that he's just another violent McDonald. The writers have done a great job of making us care about this family in a short amount of time, but they've also made it so we can see the disaster coming from a mile away. Do you think Will's brave move in court will be enough to sink Meghan? Or is she just too good at playing the system? I really want to know what you think. Is Ben becoming the very thing he's afraid of? Or can he actually break the cycle of his family's dark side? It's crazy to think that just a year ago, they were just some new people moving into the Rovers with a blindfolded Eva. Now they're the center of a murder cover-up, a paternity scandal, and a grooming trial. Talk about an eventful year on the cobbles. It feels like the show is setting them up for a massive fall, and I just hope Will and Ollie don't get crushed in the process. I have to ask you guys 2 big things before I go. First, do you think Ben is actually turning into evil Jim McDonald 2.0, or is he just a good dad who has been pushed way too far? And second, now that they've got the all clear for their health, are you actually more interested in their story? Or did you prefer the medical drama?
So, the results are in.
We finally have the all clear for the Driscoll men, but honestly, does anyone else feel like that was the quietest moment before a massive storm hits the cobbles? It's been exactly 1 year since Ben Driscoll and his partner Eva Price arrived in Weatherfield with what the producers called a suitcase full of secrets, and man, they weren't kidding. While they've been in the thick of it lately, this one specific storyline about their health has supposedly concluded, but I think the real drama is only just getting started. It was supposed to be a moment of pure relief. Eva and Ollie were setting up this big family dinner to toast to the fact that Ben, Ollie, and Will don't have the same genetic condition that Jim McDonald has. They've spent months terrified that they'd inherited myotonic dystrophy, which is a pretty heavy storyline to put on a new family. Especially when you think about how Jim's diagnosis back in 2016 really changed his life and caused progressive muscle weakness. But the funny thing is, While they're all sitting there saying they're relieved, you can just see it in Ben's eyes. This isn't the end of his problems. It's actually the moment his last excuse for his behavior just vanished. If he isn't sick, then he is to face the reality of who he actually is, and that is a much scarier thought for a man like Ben Driscoll. Let's look at why this, all clear, is such a massive pivot for the show. Up until now, Ben has been living under this cloud of what if. He's been terrified that his body would eventually betray him, just like his father Jim's did. But now that the physical threat is gone, the emotional threat of his McDonald heritage is standing front and center. I honestly think the writers chose to resolve this medical arc so quickly on IEVX because they wanted to clear the decks for the absolute explosion that happened at that dinner party. You see, the medical results were meant to be the good news that balanced out the nightmare of the Megan Walsh trial. But instead, it acted like a trigger. It gave Ben the clarity and the rage to finally tear down the matriarch of the family, Maggie Driscoll. Why did the writers choose Jim McDonald to be Ben's biological father? It wasn't just for a shock factor. It was to anchor a brand new character into the very DNA of Weatherfield's history. By making Ben a McDonald, they've essentially cursed him with a volatile temperament that he spent 40 years trying to suppress under the Driscoll name. Internalized within Ben is this terrifying realization that his entire good guy persona might just be a mask for the I am McDonald rage. When he sits in the bistro, staring at a photo of the man he thought was his father, Alan, he isn't just grieving a person. He's grieving his own identity. He's realizing that the man who raised him was a placeholder in a lie constructed by his mother's ego. I see this paternity twist as a deconstruction of this self-made man. Ben prides himself on his rugby background and his role as a landlord, but both were funded or influenced by Maggie and a father who wasn't his. He's a character living in a house of mirrors, and the all-clear result for the McDonald genetic condition is the first time he's seen a clear reflection. And honestly, he's terrified of what's looking back at him in my opinion, the all-clear for myotonic dystrophy is the most dangerous thing that could have happened to Ben.
Why?
Because it removes the medical excuse for his family's dysfunction. He can't blame biology for his struggles or his mother's cruelty anymore. If they are healthy, then their problems are purely a result of their own toxic choices. That is a much harder pill to swallow than a genetic diagnosis. From a psychological standpoint, Ben is suffering from acute identity diffusion. He's a middle-aged man who just discovered his origin story is a work of fiction. This explains his sudden bursts of violence, like the threat to put Carl Webster in the hospital. He isn't just protecting his family, he's trying to reclaim a sense of control that his mother stripped from him decades ago. Then we have Maggie Driscoll. She is hands down one of the most manipulative characters we've seen in years. She didn't just have an affair, she built a 40-year lie and then acted like she was the victim when it all came out. The flashback episode for the 65th anniversary really showed us the depth of her malice. Maggie didn't just kill Alan Driscoll. She spent 30 years forcing her son to believe he was a witness to a trauma that never happened the way she described. She turned her son into a weapon of her own defense. That flashback wasn't just filler. It was a blueprint of how Maggie manipulates reality to remain the victim, even when she's the one pushing people down the stairs. Imagine the chilling isolation Maggie feels. She bought the Rovers to give Ben a life, but in reality, she bought a cage where she could keep him close enough to monitor. Her love is a form of surveillance. Every time she insults Eva or interferes in the pub, it's a desperate attempt to remind Ben that she is the only true constant in his life, even if that constancy is built on a corpse. Maggie is the ultimate unreliable narrator of Coronation Street. She frames her affair with Jim McDonald as a momentary lapse, but it was the catalyst for a lifetime of systemic abuse. She didn't just kill a husband, she murdered her son's ability to trust anyone, including his own partner, Eva. I honestly believe Maggie is one of the most sophisticated villains the show has ever produced, because she doesn't think she's a villain. She thinks she's a single mom who brought him up. I disagree with viewers who want a quick redemption for her. Characters like Maggie don't change. They just find new ways to justify their old sins. Her decision to leave the family dinner isn't an act of grace. It's a tactical retreat. This is a classic case of cluster B personality traits, specifically a mix of narcissism and Machiavellianism. Maggie views her children and grandchildren as extensions of herself. When they fail, by finding out the truth, she punishes them with verbal salt in the wound. She lacks empathy for Ben's pain because she views his pain as an inconvenience to her narrative. But how does the health news change the dynamic with the kids? This is where it gets really complicated. The grooming storyline with Megan Walsh is the darkest thread in this whole tapestry. Why bring this to the Driscolls? Because the writers wanted to show that even a family protected by a tough rugby-playing dad can be infiltrated by a predator. Megan didn't just target Will, she targeted the family's collective blind spot. Will is carrying a weight that no teenager should ever have to hold. When he asks to go back into that courtroom and face Megan face to face, he's not just looking for a verdict, he's looking for his stolen childhood. He's feeling a mixture of profound shame and a desperate need for agency. The very thing Megan stripped away with her web of lies. This storyline reframes the concept of strength in the Driscoll family. Ben thinks strength is punching Adam Barlow or threatening Carl Webster. But the real strength is Will standing in a witness box facing the woman who manipulated his very soul. It's a shift from physical masculinity to emotional resilience, and it's making Ben look obsolete in his own family. The involvement of Megan's mother, Janine, is a masterstroke of writing. It shows that Megan's predatory nature is a refined version of Maggie's manipulation. I think it's disgusting but narratively brilliant how Megan turns her own mother into a weapon against a victim. If Megan walks free, it won't be because she's innocent. It will be because she understands the psychology of performance better than anyone else in court. Megan Walsh operates on a level of grooming and gaslighting that is textbook. She creates a trauma bond with Will, making him feel that he is the one in control, when in reality, she's pulling every string. Her attempt to blame Ben's pressure on the stand is a classic deflection technique, using the victim's own family dynamics to muddy the waters of her own guilt. The all clear was supposed to be the end of their medical drama, but it's actually the beginning of a much more violent chapter. Ben's anger is no longer directed at a looming disease. It's now laser-focused on the woman who gave him life and then ruined it. The family dinner wasn't a celebration. It was an interrogation that ended with the matriarch being exiled. But here is where the tension hits a breaking point. Megan Walsh is out. She's free, she's manipulative, and she has her mother playing the remorseful spy. We are moving from a story about secrets to a story about survival. If Ben thinks he can handle Megan with his fists the way he handled Carl Webster, he is dead wrong. Megan doesn't fight with her hands. She fights with your own mind. I'm calling it now. The Driscoll family will not survive the summer as a unit. Now that the all clear has been given, Eva is going to realize that the man she returned to Weatherfield for, the stable partner, is actually a ticking time bomb of McDonald rage. I predict that Ben's attempt to protect Will from Megan will lead to a violent confrontation that might actually land Ben in prison, leaving Maggie to swoop back in and take control of the Rovers and the grandkids once again. She wants him broken so she can be the one to fix him. Also, keep an eye on Steve McDonald. This new brotherly bond is too sweet for Corey. I suspect a massive fallout when Steve realizes the full extent of Maggie's crimes. Will Steve stand by his new brother, or will the weight of the McDonald history be too much for even him to handle? Let's talk about the irony of the Rovers Return. It's an institution of community, and yet it's housing a family that doesn't even know who they are. Ben and Eva take over the pub, put their name above the door, and for a minute, it looks like they've arrived. But they moved into a house built on Maggie's money that came from a life of deception. The all clear results don't just clear them of a disease, they clear away the fog. Ben can no longer pretend he's just a bloke with bad luck.